Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the Ivanti ELA webcast series today. Welcome to part two. This is Endpoint Security. I'm John Bartz with Network Consulting Services. With me today is Brian Hodzik, our CTO here at NCSI. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, everybody.
All right, so let's dive right in. First off, what is an ELA? There's been a ton of recent acquisitions. Ivanti has been very busy, and they've exploded exponentially as far as all the product offerings. So this ELA was created so that you can get more value out of the Ivanti product line, kind of like a buffet instead of a la carte. There's two options, one called Unified IT, which would give you all 5 of these pillars here, or the Pick 2. There's some great benefits like true forward licensing, which basically gives you 20% more licenses without having to worry about it throughout the year and adding any procurement cycles. There is the Ivanti Cloud options as well, and extraction reporting. So a lot of benefits already included in this ELA that make it a greater value. And we can dive into the details with you individually when the time is right for that. But today, we want to look at endpoint security specifically, and that is all Brian Hodzik. So Brian, you want to walk us through that today?
Yes, thank you very much, John. So today I want to talk about a couple of different products that fit in that first pillar, that endpoint security pillar from Ivanti and their ELA platform. I want to focus on the patch for Endpoint Manager, patch for Windows, patch for Sccm, so obviously lots of patching content, but also jumping over to one of my favorite acquisitions that came over from the AppSense acquisition, and that is application control. So I'm not a big fan of PowerPoint. I love to kind of show off what the technologies look like, so I'm going to dive right into showing you what they look like, how they function, and again, please use that Q&A, ask questions as we go along. I'd love to dive in deeper if anyone has any more particular questions about things. So let me jump over here really quick. I'm going to show you first our patch for Endpoint Manager. So for those that aren't familiar, Endpoint Manager is the rebranding of the traditional LANDesk technology, the management suite. So this is one of the flagship products and is only getting improved with the recent acquisition of companies like Shavlik, has brought a lot of content to our our third-party content system and so forth. So Endpoint Manager, we already have an agent on the machine. So that agent is going to give us lots of control, inventory, remote control, pushing out software, imaging. So it's going to do all of those things, but it's also going to do patch management. It is meant to replace everything that comes from Microsoft from the WSUS and Sccm platform. So WSUS, their Windows update mechanism, we're going to replace that in its entirety, but we're going to do even more than that. And a great example of that is looking at our entire patch catalog. So I'm going to open up that here. I'm going to click on scan. You're going to notice it's actually going to take quite a bit of time to open up here. And there's a reason, we have something like 49,000 definitions in our database. So the important part is focusing on more than just Microsoft. Far too many times in the patch management world, we care about Super Tuesday and we hyper-focus on Microsoft, but if you go and look into it, you'll notice that there are so many other manufacturers out there that have security problems. Java, Adobe, Chrome, Firefox, all these are not, don't have anything to do with Super Tuesday. They're not Microsoft products. So we need to focus on more than just Microsoft. As we scroll through here, you can see a bunch of different options from different companies. Here's the Zoom client, Google Chrome, 7-Zip, GoToMeeting, Dropbox, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to have lots of different manufacturers. The list is something like 75 different manufacturers that we are creating the patch content for. Now, patching is not a afterthought for Ivanti. Ivanti is currently patching something like 50 million endpoints around the world. So it is a very big focus of what Ivanti does. And you're going to kind of see that reflected in the breadth of features that we have here. So as I scroll here, you can see we have that Microsoft content. We have those third-party patches that are going to be out there as well. So this is everything. This is 49,453 vulnerabilities. This is probably a little bit for most people to digest. So we're going to focus on detected. Now, detected is just simply all of the patches that I need in my organization because they have been found. If we don't have Dropbox installed, let's not show that Dropbox is vulnerable. So these ones we actually found in our environment. At quick glance, you can see the ID of it, the severity of it, if there's a knowledge base article ID associated with it, what the title is, the summary, et cetera. When we're ready, we can right-click on a particular vulnerability and we can open it up. And there's a reason that I call them vulnerabilities, because the vulnerability is that MS16-075_MSU, and this is the actual patch down below. And what you'll notice is oftentimes for a single vulnerability, this is multiple patches. So this is a Windows Vista 64-bit patch, Windows Vista 32-bit, Windows 7 64-bit, Windows 7 32-bit, Windows 8.1, Windows RT, et cetera, et cetera. What we're going to do is try and take care of all of that for you. You just need to say, hey, I want to apply MS16075, and we're going to take care of what patch actually gets installed, making sure it's the right operating system, etc. Now, we're going to download those patches for you onto our Ivanti server here, and we're going to automatically download it. You can see it found a Windows 7 32-bit in my environment, so I downloaded it. If I wanted to go download that patch, it's not a problem. I can just right-click on it and download it. It grabs it, and away I go. So no, tracking that down or finding that particular patch. That's what's great about the patch for Endpoint, is it's kind of served up to you on a silver platter, not just the Microsoft patches, but everything else. I can go to the description here, read more about it up here in the box, and click on this link, go to the manufacturer's website if I have trouble sleeping at night and I want to read these TechNet articles. I can look at dependencies. I can see if it replaces any patches or has been replaced by any patches. And I can look at my autofix. Now, autofix is our magic way to ensure that it is easy from a patch management perspective for you. So autofix gives you the way to approve this patch to be sent out to a set of machines. And you'll see, for example, in here I have like a patch pilot group. It's always nice to go and test our patches before we push them out to everyone. So I've created a patch pilot group. My personal philosophy is that should be a good, healthy mix across the organization. Don't just pick 4 people in IT. That's not a healthy mix. Let's pick, people over in accounting and 2 people in the warehouse and 3 people, that work over in the distribution factory. Let's pick a nice, healthy mix of what our organization actually looks like. And then a little secret here, don't tell them they're in the patch pilot group, or I guarantee the next time that their car doesn't start, they're going to call you up and say, well, it's probably because you patched my computer. They'll always find a reason to blame the patches. So I don't tell them that they're in the patch pilot group, but then I tell the help desk who is in the patch pilot group. That way, if we recognize a problem associated with a patch, we can potentially track that down to being in the patch pilot group. Then you can see we have other options. Maybe you're going to break it down by servers or workstations or everyone that exists at a certain campus or everyone that's in that Denver office. You get to choose how that works and what machines would go out to. So everyone has a different kind of philosophy when it comes to patch management. I want to enable it so you can do it however you want. I have a lot of organizations that come in here and say, well, we're going to focus on it on a monthly basis. Okay, that's fine. So let's just kind of do a date published here. And I can go up to the top here and I say, okay, let's look at the patches for the month of December, for example. I can look through there. I can notice that they're not even all Microsoft, let alone even all for Microsoft operating systems. You can see we have patch management for Mac and Linux in here. So here's some patches that would go out to Google Chrome on Mac and other things. So I could right-click on this and I could choose to turn on autofix. I could say, okay, I'm going to roll it out to my patch pilot group, the 3rd week of the month, and then I'm going to roll it out to all workstations the 4th week of the month, or whatever kind of mechanism you want to come up with. What's great about that is you don't really have to pay too much attention to the particulars of who and where and why this gets pushed out. That's handled in a slightly different place in our agent settings. What's important about this is not everyone is created equal. Are we going to apply the same level of patching that we do to the CEO's machine as we are to a machine that's hooked up to, a piece of machinery, or a machine that is, out at the receptionist desk? So all of them are different scenarios that we potentially need to patch for. So for example, here I can control the schedule. This controls when I run my scans and my repairs. You can see I can have it repeat after a certain amount of time. I could choose what time range this particularly happens. Maybe it only happens on a certain day of the month or a certain day of the week, or maybe it has to be a certain context. The machine has to be locked, or the screensaver needs to be active, or something like that. I can apply those filters to ensure that it only happens when I want it to happen. Now, applying patches, I actually think is relatively easy, but the most difficult thing in the world is asking a user to reboot. So we have a very dedicated reboot setting here. Patch management is a really delicate political dance. If we patch too aggressively and ask to reboot too much, we're getting a lot of pushback from the organization, but we have to patch. It's really critical to us. So they might make it worse if we get more aggressive. So you're probably going to have multiple different types of devices. I have corporate laptops, I have executives, I have machines that are in stores. You're going to go through here and control whether we're going to force a reboot to happen, whether we're going to detect it, whether we're never going to reboot. You can see we can suppress all the Windows update mechanism. Let's just turn that off. We don't need it anymore, so we'll just suppress anything that Windows would have normally popped up with. We can have it actually prompt the user and give them a customized message up here. And I'm a big fan of branding it. Let's go in and change what this box looks like. Vertrillo is the name of my fake company that I use in my demo system here. So grab your logo, slap it in here, customize this text box so we can actually communicate to the end user what's happening here, not they get 15 different pop-up boxes and they don't know what they are. And actually in our security suite, we can actually go and disable that. So we can turn off Java update, turn off Windows update, turn off those common update boxes that are prompting the user that they can't even apply because they're not even necessarily administrator. So let's customize that. Let's force them to reboot after a certain amount of time, but I can do things like, if they haven't clicked on anything or if no one's logged in. And then I could also apply a maintenance window. I only want to do an automatic reboot on the 3rd Sunday of the month or anything like that. So this gives us, extreme control over, what we're going to patch, how we're going to patch it, and who it gets applied to. But the goal of this is that we set this up ahead of time, and then we can kind of turn it into a much more automatic fashion with our rollout projects concept. So rollout projects is the idea that we want the system to ingest new content and then automatically run through that from a scheduling perspective. So, in my example here, what I've done is I've created multiple different steps. I'm patching the pilot group. So the actions that are going to happen in the patching of pilot group says we're going to turn on autofix for a certain subset of our machines. And you would come in here and say, okay, I want to turn it on for the patch pilot group. You can say, who's a member of that group? Who are the targets that we're specifically going to be sending that out to? Maybe I need to have a certain success rate. Only proceed to the next step if I have 80% of my machines have succeeded with this. Maybe I need to have an additional duration where I say, that's great, but then we're going to wait 1 week after this completes before we move on to the next step of the process. We can even do things like, ask for approvals, where we send out a approval email to someone that says, hey, I've patched these machines. Are we okay to move on to the next step? You can see my next step in this rollout project is to patch all the desktops. And so here, I could change the autofix setting to say, I want to enable that. I want to turn that off for all workstations. And kind of away I go. So I can control how that patch process works when those patches come in, and turn it from a much more manual process to even a very automated version of this, to where the only thing that you're doing is looking out for exceptions to see if there's any particular problems inside of that patch group where those patches have come back and are causing issues. So that's kind of the main functions of our patch for Endpoint. I want to point out a couple of other cool things that we have inside the Endpoint Manager as it relates to our security settings, and that's things like, just like I described, the ability to go and turn off certain functions. So here in my security threat, we have the ability to, just like I was describing, turn off the Java update scan. So, if we search for Java in here, we'll see disable Java update. So I can enable that like I enable another patch, and it can control whether, Java actually is going to try and update on its own. Nope, it's going to turn that off. We're going to be in charge of updating Java, and that's within kind of our purview. A couple of other cool things in the Endpoint Security suite. If we go over here and look at our Endpoint Security, one of the most popular is the device control. A lot of people want to be able to control what devices people are plugging in. So I can go in here and say that, when someone plugs in a USB device, I'm going to either block access to it, or I'm going to turn it into read-only. Maybe if I'm going to leave read-write access, I'm going to force them to turn on encryption. So we're going to pop up with a box and say, the device is blocked, or you need to turn on encryption, and we give them the executable to enable that encryption software. We can block different things like, CD, DVD, Blu-ray drives, block different ports and interfaces and things like that. We always have exceptions to that. And then shadow copy, anytime they copy something out to a USB drive, let's make a copy of that, store it right here for forensic purposes. So We have lots of other things inside of that security suite. We have our own firewall. We have some other endpoint security controls where we can interact with your antivirus and so forth, and provide some network isolation to where if your antivirus reports that there's an infection, we can actually fire up our firewall and virtually isolate it from the network instead of having to go and actually physically unplug the cable from the network. So I'm going to stop for a second and see if there's any questions about our endpoint patch. Looks like we have a couple coming up here already. First question, what is an upgrade path to this product from Ivanti Protect for servers? It used to be called Shavlik Protect. So the short answer on that is we are unifying the back end, not unifying the front end. And that seems really counterintuitive to the way that most people think about it. But let me explain why. So the vulnerability database that we have on the back end, so that is a content system where Ivanti personnel go out and they find this patch content, right? So they when Google Chrome makes an announcement that they have a new version, they go find out what the version number is. How does it make it vulnerable? Does it show as a registry key or a something else in the system? How do we detect whether that is vulnerable or not? So that is the content team creates that. What's going to happen, and it actually already happened about a year and change ago, and it was kind of under the covers it was happening, but that content is now using the engine here in Ivanti Endpoint Manager is actually using that patch for Windows is the official name of the product, that former Shavlik product. It's using that engine, that content database today. So they kind of midstream changed it a year and change ago. And the reason that we're going to keep that older product, older product's not the right term, that other product patch for Windows is because there's a lot of organizations that from a political and technological reasons separate workstation patching and server patching. And so server patching gives us the ability to, have that kind of as an island by itself, because sometimes the server team doesn't want to play around with the tool that the endpoint team is using, and vice versa. So you can use Endpoint Manager to patch servers, and you can use Patch for Windows to patch clients. However, we've found that from a size perspective, once you reach a certain size of organization, I found it to be, I don't know, maybe 1,000 users or larger. Those roles from an organizational perspective are split, so we end up having a Patch for Windows team, and that is the server team, and an Endpoint Manager, and that's the Workstation team. So we don't want to force them to use the same console, so we're going to have them have different consoles, but know that on the very back end, the content and the engine is actually the same thing. So sorry, long-winded answer there, but that actually comes up a bit, so great question. All right, next one. With regard to blocking USB thumb drives, do you have the capability of allowing some of them? For example, some are needed for multi-factor authentication to certain vendor websites. Absolutely. So back here under our agent settings, when you go into the device control, we have the ability to create exceptions to that list. So here under the exception, you can add that as a hardware ID or a vendor ID or a compatible ID. You just need to go find out what that device ID or something like that is, and then we can put that in here as an exception that we would want to allow that. So you just need to go find out the parameter that is relatively unique to that. If it's just a super ultra generic thumb drive that there's 10 million of them in the world, that's not going to be a perfect fit. But if it is something like multi-factor and things like that, they tend to be a lot more unique. Find out if there's a unique parameter associated with it, and then that can be allowed. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, I'm going to jump on to the next product I want to talk about, and that's Patch for Windows. So I've already kind of alluded to that a little bit. So Patch for Windows comes from the line of software, like I've mentioned a couple of times, that Shavlik product. So for those that don't know, Shavlik, specifically the gentleman who created it, Mark Shavlik, was one of the employees at Microsoft that helped create patching and helped create the Windows Update system. So a great lineage when it comes to patching. And the claim to fame that Patch for Windows has is its ability to patch agentlessly. So as we scroll through our list here, you can see I have a bunch of machines, and over on the right-hand side, there's a column here called Agent State. Now, I've installed a couple of agents just to play around with it to kind of show what the differences are, but you can see the majority of my machines say no agent. So when you start looking into the server side of the house, the infrastructure side of the house, adding more agents is not ideal. They don't want to say, hey, go pile all these more agents on my server. So the technology can do it agentlessly, meaning we just remotely connect to the administrative share. We just copy over our scanning engine. We do our scanning, we do our repairing, and then we remove it and we move on. So no agent is required. You can also see, if you look really closely on the machine name, you can actually integrate with VMware. So we have a bunch of these virtual machines were imported from VMware. Look, we even have a template right here. That's a little icon for a VMware template. So we still do physical machines. That's fine and perfect, but we do virtual machines as well. Now, what I like about this is it gives me a very easy, digestible understanding of what's going on with patching. Sometimes this is a lot harder than it seems to just say, hey, am I up to date on patching? Well, look at this visual breakdown that I have in the patch breakdown bar here. Green is good, red is bad. So it's very easy to me to say, oh, this machine's doing great and this one's doing bad. I don't have to go and run 47 different reports or, try and track that down. It's very easy for me to understand that. Now, I keep my environment out of date on purpose to show what it looks like, but you would normally have your machines much more up to date than this. So I've discovered a bunch of my machines. For example, here I've organized it in groups. I have my workstations up here. I have servers here. Again, we can patch both operating systems, servers and workstations with this product. It just tends to be a little bit more workstation heavy. And while we're talking about who we patch, this product is actually transforming right now. It's in community release, which is kind of like a beta-like product, so I didn't want to show it off yet. But there's a new product called ISEC that the Ivanti Security controls that is going to incorporate this product, but then it's also going to add Linux and Mac patching as well, so we can have a single console that's going to do what previously patched for Windows and Mac and Linux all in the same unified console. So if that's of interest, definitely hit me up and we can get you a demonstration of what that particular product looks like. And that's coming out any day now. Okay, so when I click on a machine here down at the bottom, it's going to show me the outstanding patches that I have. It's going to tell me the different missing patches. I have the ability to, if I choose to, I can right-click on it and I can deploy it. I can deploy the selected patches. I can deploy all missing patches. I can highlight multiple. I can even highlight the entire group. I can just go in here and say, I want to deploy all the missing patches this entire group. And what's great about that is it gives us the ability to control the how that patching process works. So if we go in here and click on one of these patches and say that we want to deploy the selected missing patch, it's going to pop up and ask me how I want to deploy it. So this is our deployment methodology. This is very important because it has a lot of server-oriented functions. So let's up here at the top, let's say these are going to be my web servers or something like that. You can see I can do things like shutting down IIS or shutting down the SQL server to make sure those aren't running as part of our patch process. I can do a pre-deployment reboot, meaning reboot before we apply any patches. Maybe there's something stuck in RAM or, we're having issues with, performance, so we can just have it reboot before we apply a patch. I can do a post-deployment reboot after I apply the patches. I can do an email. This is really cool. So I can assign a machine owner, and I can go in here and say, well, I want to send the machine owner a deployment notification. In most organizations, you have, the people who own the web servers and the people who are the database administrators and the people who own the, the various systems that we have. They're the owners or the administrators of those machines, but they may not be the patch administrators of it. So I can identify who owns these machines and then send them a nice, neat report. By the way, here's all the patches that I just sent out to your machine and I rebooted it. So we have, details or doing it by the deployment or by the machine. You can choose who you're notifying and when you're notifying. Again, a very server-oriented thing. I don't think we're going to be telling the end user, by the way, we installed these 14 security patches. They're not going to be able to do anything with that, but a server administrator is totally different. They absolutely would. Custom actions is really cool. A lot of times people say, oh, well, this is, whoops, web servers. I just need to save that. with a unique name. I can do different actions as it relates to when this patch is happening. So for example, if I wanted to say all deployments using this template after a reboot, I could go in here and say after reboot.ps1. So then I can tell my administrators, oh, you have some special, unique system that needs to start up the services in an exact order or something like that. Fine, create a PowerShell script on the root of your C drive or whatever, and I will execute that after we reboot the machine. Or maybe it's before we reboot, or before we apply any patches, we stop certain services, you know, anything we want. So very server-oriented functions that I could run on that particular machine, you know, ahead of patches. And then lastly, with VMware, I can integrate with VMware and I can take snapshots. So, you know, I can say to go and take a snapshot of the virtual machine beforehand, before we patch. That way, if in case there's a problem, we can always revert that snapshot back down. The patch for Windows is a very, very easy product. You'd be surprised how many times that I just simply send an email to a customer with the installer, and a couple of hours later they say, oh yeah, I've got it installed, I'm already applying patches. You know, it is very, very, very easy. Sometimes like Endpoint Manager is a little bit more daunting because it's a much bigger product, does a lot of things. Patch for Windows is incredibly focused on just the patch management functionality, hence it makes it very, very easy to consume. So if you want to kick the tires on this, like I said, an email with a download link, and a couple of hours later, you're going to be an expert in how this product works. Remember, there's also evolving into that new ISEC, Ivanti Security Controls product that's going to include Mac and Linux in that patching, as well as something I'm going to talk about in 2 items from now, and that's the application control. So let's open it up for some questions on Patch for Windows. So here I've got a question. Are the functions that were previously included in Shavlik Protect Power Pack included in Patch for Windows? That is a great question. I've actually had that question asked for me before, and I actually don't know the answer to that. So I'm sorry. I will find out what the answer to that is. I believe that the answer is yes, but I don't want to commit to that not knowing 100% of the details. So let me find out that, and we can send out an update later for whether the Power Pack add-on to Shavlik Protect is included in Patch for Windows and or the new ISEC product. All right, so it doesn't look like we have any more questions on Patch for Windows, so I'm going to jump on to the next couple of things. Oh, we got one more question. How does all this work in an isolated environment, a disconnected network? I'm currently using Ivanti Endpoint Security 8.5, but interested in moving to a newer product. So an isolated network, be it a air-gapped network or a secret network or something like that, you know, absolutely doable. It just requires some work because you have to manually transport over the patching content. So you got to bring over the patches. They don't automatically download from the internet because you're probably completely isolated from that. So both Endpoint Manager and this Patch for Windows product can work in isolated environments. Just, you know, once a week or once a month or whatever schedule that you create, you would just copy over the content from a you know, from a live network that can get on the internet, copy it to that air-gapped network, and it would ingest that content, and then it would be able to push out. So once in that isolated network, it would still have, you know, almost all of the normal functionality that we have today. Great question. Okay, let's jump back to our PowerPoint just to make sure I'm staying on track. Okay, I want to talk about Patch for Sccm. This is incredibly quick and incredibly easy to digest. There are some people out there that for political or technological reasons still use Sccm and the Windows Update, WSUS system. Patch for Sccm is a content pack. So you'll notice I'm actually in the Sccm console here, yet we have an Ivanti patch in the software updates, and you can see all that third-party content. So the Firefoxes, the Chromes, the Citrix, the, you know, Autodesk, Apple, etc. All of that content, Microsoft doesn't create that. They don't put it in the Windows Update system. You're never going to see it. So Patch for Sccm just is the content. It's not the engine or the infrastructure. We just populate the content into Patch for Sccm. You only need this if you are forced to continue to still use Sccm. the whole reason we're having these webinars is to kind of talk about the enterprise license agreement. If you get that, you're going to be entitled to the first two products that we talked about that will be far superior. But if you're mandated to use Sccm or for some reason you're going to stick with it, this is a great content pack for you, incredibly cost effective, and makes it so that Sccm or WSUS no longer have blinders to all the other manufacturers out there. So, Wireshark and Vmware and PDF Exchange and LibreOffice and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That same 75-ish manufacturer library that we have can be applied to Sccm. So that was a quick and dirty one. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about application control. One of my personal favorites. I get really excited when I get to show this off. So first, a philosophical question. What applications are users allowed to run on their machines? The short answer is everything. There is nothing in the Windows ecosystem that denies users from running executables. Think about it. Google Chrome. Google Chrome, I can download as a regular user and I can install it on my machine. It installs in the local profile. I didn't need to be an admin to do that. So Google Chrome we trust, that's not really a big deal. But what about everything else? What about all the other malware and other kind of malicious content, or even not even malicious, and it's just something you don't want them to be running in your organization? Shadow IT, where they're doing it on their own. Microsoft doesn't have an ability to control that. They live in a world of black and white where you're a complete administrator or you're nothing. And if you can read the executable, you can run it. With application control, this came over from our AppSense acquisition. This gives us the ability to change that, and it focuses on two things. Number one, controlling what the user can run, and then number two, controlling administrative rights. So let's talk about the first one first, controlling what they can run. Application whitelisting. People have been talking about application whitelisting and blacklisting for, 10, 12, 15 years. And I found that it is the biggest piece of shelfware ever, meaning people buy it, they go to implement it, realize it's too complicated, and so they stop. And really it just has to do with the fact that it's too much of a burden to manage. You need to have a list. That's what whitelist means, is a list of applications that are good. How big is that list going to be? 5,000, 10,000, 15,000? When we start digging under the covers, we realize there's so many executables and so many files that are being accessed that you're never going to be able to manage a list properly. So let's get the same objective, controlling what users execute, but let's drop the list part. And that's what application control does. So we have a little slider right here. This slider gives me the control to say what I want to have from a control perspective. The first one, or the one on the far right here, is unrestricted. This is the world that you live in today. This is Microsoft's own logic. If the user can read the executable, they can run the executable, and that's it. So this is the world you live in today. I want you to get all the way over to this left, restricted. Now, restricted is going to follow some very simple logic, almost too simple. The first time I saw this, I was like, no, it can't be that easy. There's got to be something else going on here, but it really isn't. So let's take a file on my machine. I'm looking at regedit.exe. I'm going to look at the properties of it. I'm going to go to security. I'm going to click on advanced, and I'm going to see who the owner is. Who owns this from an NTFS perspective? Well, in this case, it's an account called Trusted Installer. Now, Trusted Installer just means the machine installed it at the beginning, because think about it, nobody really installs regedit. It just appears when I first install the operating system. So that's who puts it there, is a user called Trusted Installer. We trust Trusted Installer, hence the name, right? So we're going to allow this application to run. And so what we're going to do is follow a very simple principle. If we own the file, or by proxy, a list of trusted owners here, and you get to control who that list is, if we or someone we trust owns it, it is allowed to run. If we do not own it, it is not allowed to run. So who do we not want to trust? The end user. The end user is the least trustworthy person out there. So let's not trust anything that they do, and let's trust all of the stuff that we do. So for example, here's my configuration. This is up and going in my environment here today. This is my list of allowed items. you remember how whitelisting was a list of 10,000 applications or 20,000 applications? I've gone and added 4, and this is just kind of built-in logic to make sure our own stuff always works. But let's jump over to a workstation, kind of poke around at what that looks like. So here I have a workstation with that configuration. Now I installed a whole bunch of crap on this, just a bunch of random, whatever, executables. I filled this up with lots of executables. Notice none of them were on that list of approved executables, but since the system installed it, or I think I pushed these out with our Endpoint Manager, and again, we trust our Endpoint Manager account, so we're going to trust that. But my user who logged in, he went and downloaded PuTTY, which, granted, you could say, well, PuTTY is something that you probably trust. Well, yes, but we want to stick to our principle that we don't know. For all we know, there's an infected version of PuTTY that has keylogger in it. We just don't know. So this is owned by me, and I'm not an administrator. I'm not a trusted user in my environment. I'm just a regular old-fashioned user. And when that user tries to execute it, they're going to get this message that says that it's being denied. And that really is the goal. It looks like a very simple thing, but a lot of things were going on there. We looked at the NTFS permission, we saw that it was not owned by a trusted owner, and we denied it. So when all these other applications need to update, or they receive patches, or anything like that happens, we are the ones in the IT department controlling that. So we are going to maintain ownership of those files, meaning we're not going to have to go and add them to a list. Stop talking about lists. Lists are the problem. We want to make it so that you have an exception list of, 5 or 10, maybe executables. You're never going to be able to manage a list of 20,000. It's just impossible. So, that's the end result. The user can't download things that we are not authorizing them to do. So that's the first half, the executable control. You don't have to go that far. You could go into, audit only, where you're just logging, or self-authorizing, where, they're going to be asked if they're sure they want to run it. You can kind of step your way into it. It doesn't have to be a black and white world here either. You can also do it based on groups. I have an everyone group. I have an administrators group. I have my help desk group. They may have different levels or different allowed items, things like that. So that was the first half of the equation. That's the executable side. The other half is privileges, and this may be even more exciting than the application side. Microsoft lives in a world of black and white, just like I've said before. And I never understood why this was, because they tried it. They have like power user. When you look at an administrator on a local machine, a Windows box, there's administrator, there's normal user, and then there's power user. We never really got to use that very well. What did that really mean? What it boiled down to was full admin or nothing. And that really is a problem, because we from a political perspective, we have to give in. What about your CIO? Is he an admin on his box, his or her box? Well, probably, because politically that's a difficult thing to do. What about programmers? Do programmers have local admin rights? Maybe the political fight wasn't worth it, and so we gave up when we gave the programmers admin rights. Oh, we have some funky legacy application. We're going to have to give up admin rights to that as well. So we end up giving far too many admin rights away. And then the people that we did take it away from, the person over in accounting, when they call up with a basic function like they want to add a printer or install a font, they don't have the rights to do that. And, it creates a ticket, and we have to go through the work and do something that we probably really don't care about. So let's control that a little bit better, and let's talk about our user privileges. This gives us the ability to choose one of a couple of different things. I can choose this option called Built-in Elevate. What Built-in Elevate means is give admin rights to that particular function. So if you look close, I have fontview.exe right here. Well, what does that look like from an end user's perspective? So an end user downloads a font, and if you didn't know, you have to be an administrator to install a font, and that's probably something that we don't care about. We really care whether they're installing fonts or not. I'll let you make that decision, but most people say, no, whatever. Just, them calling into the help desk doesn't make our lives easier by having to do this. So if you look closely, you'll see a shield. That shield is the UAC. You don't have enough credentials. I'm going to pop up and ask you for UAC credentials in order to do this. So let's run it. So what happened there? It didn't prompt. It didn't ask. You've already seen that I'm not an administrator on this machine. Well, that's the magic of the agent. What happened was, when this executable started, the policy was built in Elevate, meaning I have given out admin rights for just that process, not anything else. This window right here is not admin. that this window is, and you can control whether common dialog boxes or child processes and so forth are administrator. But I've given it out for just one thing. And now I can be very, very selective on that. I can give it out for font view. I could give it out to let them install Chrome. So here's Chrome setup.exe, where I could say, oh, I'm going to allow that, and that is going to be trusted. Here I've created an example for Visual Studio, and I've applied a policy called developers that's maybe a little bit more nuanced. Developers will come back and say, oh, I need to profile a single process, or I need to debug a program, or I need to load or unload device drivers, or whatever. So I've created a policy for them. So now when they execute Visual Studio.exe, I'm going to use the policy called developers, meaning that application is going to have administrative rights, but the user doesn't necessarily have it. So now I can go back to those developers, and they can get what they want, which is the ability to run that process and program, and I get what I want because they're not still an administrator. Now, I'm not going to win all those battles. Let's go back to the CIO. I'm not going to be able to do it in the CIO. Just politically, I can't do that. So I actually have the ability to do something called built-in restrict. Built-in restrict takes away rights. So you could be a full domain admin, but if you log into one of my machines, you're going to be locked down on certain aspects. So here you could do it on applications if I wanted to block applications, or certain components like all the just different Windows components and updates and internet options and MMC stuff and control panel stuff. I could restrict that. So no matter what, you're a full domain admin, you're the CIO, you can't change the date and time. That's something that I just flat out restricted. Or you can even go into very specific detail. Another example here from a workstation perspective is maybe you want to allow this, maybe you don't, but I can actually give my administrators the ability to restart certain services. So I have the print spooler here. The user can actually go in and restart this print spooler if I want to give them access to that, or other services, things like that. So I can control that by saying I'm going to allow them manipulate these certain services. I'm going to either do a restrict. Maybe I don't want them to touch my services like AppSense, even if they're an admin. Even if they're an admin, don't let them touch my product, or don't let them touch the antivirus or the logging system or something like that. And don't let them clear out the event log or kill certain processes, or give them the ability to. I could change this to built-in elevate and let them have the rights to kill that. So uninstall controls as well. You can uninstall software, that's fine, but when you go to uninstall these items, I'm going to block that from happening, even if they are a full domain administrator. So we can give out rights with a scalpel instead of sledgehammer. Being able to give individual rights for individual applications, individual components versus this black and white world that we live in today. So again, we can apply it at a group level, at a user level, at a device level, however you see that heading out there. I like this because it's not a huge communication system. It's not like previous whitelisting software that I've seen out there that they have to get updated lists on a regular basis and you have to push it out. And there's a big update, it breaks a bunch of stuff. This is kind of an offline technology. Since we're using the NTFS file ownership attribute, all of that already exists on the machine. So I don't need to go in and have that big list. This could be completely offline and run fine for months without any updates, and it's almost certainly not going to be detrimentally affected by that. So it doesn't have this huge communication infrastructure in order to be able to pull this off. Okay, so that was a quick run through on our application control. Like I was describing, the patch for Windows is actually transforming right now as we speak into the Ivanti security controls, which will be patch for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and include the application control functionality. So that's going to be a great product for people that are looking to jump more into the security functions as it relates to Ivanti. All right, so that was kind of my pitch on everything inside the, not everything, the exciting points and some of the big pieces of the puzzle inside of our security pillar that we talked about. I'll open up the Q&A and see if anyone has any questions on application control while I talk about the rest of this. We talked about our endpoint security pillar today, unified endpoint management. That's a webinar we're going to be giving coming up here on March 21st. IT asset management, we actually already did. That's already recorded and on our YouTube channel. I think John can put it out in the chat message there, so everyone can have a link to that. And then service management, we're going to show on March 7th, and our identity platform, we're going to show on March 14th. I'll open it up to questions. I don't see any more questions come in on application control. So I'll just throw out there if anyone wants to have a deeper dive on any of this technology, absolutely hit me up, or your salesperson, or call our main number, whatever you can come up with. I'd be happy to give you a deeper dive, and we can get into much more of the details associated with any of these products. We got one more question that came in, and somebody asked what pillar includes the imaging functionality. So that's a unified endpoint management, the orange one there, the second one over. So if you're curious about that and want to know more about that, definitely attend our March 21st webinar. We'll go into more detail on how that works, what that is, and you can learn more there.
Okay, 2 down, 3 to go as we continue our weekly ELA webinar series here. Brian, thanks for everything that you do, and we're going to see you again in at least one more of these. And any last comments before we close?
Nope, I just want to say thank you to everyone for attending. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, here's my contact information. Please hit me up anytime. I'm happy to help.
Okay, perfect. And we'll see everybody next Thursday at the same time. And thanks for joining us today. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.